50 years ago, our region inspired a nation to believe the impossible was possible. Right here in Seattle, we hosted a World's Fair that introduced over 10 million people to the next generation of technology, and then we created it. Our region's strength has long been our ability to identify and understand emerging industries, and then lead them. Think about it. William Boeing did it in the early 1900s with aircraft, and Bill Gates, Paul Allen did it in the 70s and 80s with operating systems, and Jeff Bezos did it in the mid to late 90s with e-commerce. Well, over the past couple of decades, a new industry has been emerging, the video game industry. And Seattle is again on the cutting edge. We opened just now with a piece kind of outlining the evolution of video games, what they once were and what they now are. But what I want to speak with you about today is what they are going to be. If you have a child, grandchild, nephew, spouse who plays video games, you're going to want to listen very, very closely. And if you don't, you're going to want to listen closely as well, and I'll tell you why. The economic impact of the video game industry on our region is significant and growing. In 2006, 150 small and medium-sized local game companies created over $3.1 billion in revenue in our region. Not bad. But flash forward 5 years. In 2011, 350 small and medium-sized local game companies in our region created $9.7 billion in revenue. That is more than our region's entire fashion industry. It is almost 3 times more than our region's entire life sciences industry, and it's 4 times more than our region's music industry. The bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, if you do not currently have a client or a tenant that is a video game company, you soon will. Video game companies are moving here and emerging here at an exponential rate. Why? Because we have the educated, artistic, and technologically savvy workforce that video game companies need. For example, Forbes magazine recently ranked us as #1 in the nation for high-tech job growth. Video game companies supply over 20,000 of those jobs. And here's a really interesting statistic. While the median wage in King County per the 2010 census is under $40,000, the median wage in the video game industry in King County is over $86,000. So how can companies pay so much? How's it possible? Let's look at one of the giants. This is Microsoft and their Xbox, their game division. In November and December 2010, and by the way, these stats were not considered in the earlier economic impact stats. These are totally separate. In November and December 2010, Microsoft's game division sold 6.3 million Xboxes. That is more than 1 per second. In 2011, did sales drop off? No, they increased by 50%. Or consider local game company Big Fish. Big Fish boasted 1 billion game downloads over the past decade. 1 billion. That is 3 downloads per second, every second, for the last 10 years. So who is playing all of these games? Well, according to NPD, a top 25 global statistics firm, over 170 million Americans. 170 million. That is more than voted in the 2012 presidential election. It is more than the most watched event in the history of United States television, the 2011 Super Bowl. It is a lot of people. And what percentage of that 170 million do you think are female? 10%? 15%? 47% of gamers today are women, nearly 80 million. And what percentage of that 170 million do you think are adults? Maybe the 20% that get dragged along to play with their kids? No. 80% of gamers today are adults. 27% of gamers are over the age of 50. But what I want to focus on is that other 20% really quickly, the 20% that are under 18, because that stat's a little bit misleading. See, if you take all 300 million people in the United States and you look at how many are ages 0 to 18, It's actually only about 23% of our entire population. So when we focus in on that 23% and we say, okay, how many of those ages 5 to 18 are playing games today? 95%. 95% of children today are playing video games. So how long are the 170 million people who are playing now? Well, there's been a 200% increase in playtime since 2002. But according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, the stats are even more interesting when it comes to kids. In 1999, the average child who played video games, and keep in mind it's 95% of the population, played an hour and 5 minutes. As of 2009, they played 2 hours per day. 2 hours per day. So what are they playing? Well, they're playing mobile games. 50% of games played today are played on mobile devices, like Angry Birds. They're playing big blockbuster console games. 27% of the games today are played on consoles, like these. And Xbox has 35 million users who play on average 60 hours per month. That is 2.1 billion hours per month spent playing video games. 40% of video games today are action, war, or first-person shooter. If you want your child to learn to kill the unknown enemy, video game companies can teach them how. And some of the games are violent. Very, very violent. This is what children are playing today. It's what they spend 2 hours per day playing. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and try to draw a link between violence in video games and violence in society. There are plenty of studies out there that already do that. Instead, I am going to ask you to imagine a world where video games are used to educate, to find cures for disease, to bring communities together, and to help build the leaders of tomorrow. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is what children play 2 hours per day. This sold 3 million copies. Those war games sold 25 million. And it is up to us, as consumers and community leaders, to turn this mayhem into math, to turn these kills into cures. There are many statistics firms that will tell you that by the time a child reaches age 21 today, they will have played over 10,000 hours of video games and sent and received over 250,000 emails and text messages. Children today talk, text, play video games, listen to their iPods, and ignore their parents all at once. And they receive and process information differently than we did. And so over the next 10 years, education is going to change. Not because we want it to, but because it has to. In today's interactive world, children are no longer set up for the passive consumption of copious amounts of information over long periods of time. And so I'm going to talk to you today about a few different games and what they're doing in the Games for Good sector. First is DragonBox. DragonBox is a really, really simple game. Basically, what happens is there's a little box, you'll see it, it's inside, there are a bunch of little tiles, and there's a little box inside one with stars floating around it, and there's an equal sign. And then there are a bunch of other little picture tiles all around it. And you need to eliminate all of the picture tiles and get it so just the box is on one side of the equal sign. And if you do that, you get a little baby electronic dragon, and each time you pass a level, it grows. This game is actually more popular in parts of Europe than Angry Birds, believe it or not. Jonathan Liu of Wired Magazine writes a great column called Geek Dad, and he asked his 5-year-old and 8-year-old daughters to test out DragonBox for him. So let's take a look at what happened here. So you'll see up there that there is a box in that kind of red square with stars floating around it, and it equals a dragon-looking thing. The flies will eliminate one another, and anytime two things, one's on top and one's on bottom, is the same, it becomes a die, which signals a 1. So, oh, she didn't like that. Okay, she's going back. All right, so now we need to get rid of that tomato. So what does she do? She puts a tomato under it, and she puts a tomato under the other side, because you have to balance the equation, and that gets rid of it, and she gets rid of the 1s. And guess what? She got the box by itself, and the dragon grows. And as the levels proceed and progress, the box turns into an X, and the picture tiles turn into letters and numbers. And so now we have x over 6 equals c plus d. She needs to get the x by itself for her dragon to grow. So she knows from earlier, from the tiles, if she puts 1 on top, and she has to balance it out on the other side of the equal sign. Okay, now we can get rid of that 6, and 1 times x equals x, so you can get rid of the 1. We can get, there we go. And x equals 6c plus 6d, and the dragon grows. And if you're wondering what you just watched, ladies and gentlemen, you did in fact watch a video game teach a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old linear algebra. Now, Edmund Burke once said, "Those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it." And that's a very, very scary concept in the United States. On the last national standardized history exam given out by the US Department of Education to 4th, 8th, and 12th graders, 4th graders scored on average 43%. On average. Seniors, 12th graders, scored 57%. Now, whether it's 43 or 57, it doesn't matter. Our kids are failing history. It's true. So our friends at Florida Virtual School created a game called Conspiracy Code. And Conspiracy Code, as you'll see here, was developed by Florida Virtual School and 360 Ed, a leading game development company. The game's goal is to teach students history in an interactive 3D environment. Students play one of 2 secret agents whose job it is to save futuristic Coverton City from the evil Conspiracy Incorporated, a shadowy organization bent on ruling the future by erasing the past. Students throughout the game must find, collect, and analyze historical clues. And teachers can supervise their action and assess it through a number of assignments seamlessly integrated into the gameplay process. The game was developed as the result of an unusual collaboration between educators, neurologists, child psychologists, and game developers. The game targets the top 12 brain-based learning principles for children. So whether it's learning through games with teacher supervision or outside of the classroom like Dragonbox, games can teach scholastics. But they can teach more important lessons as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the 2010 game, EVOKE.
My name is Alchemy. And this is an urgent evoke. Wherever you are, whoever you are, if you found this message, it's your destiny to join us. Humanity needs our help. If you have a problem and you can't solve it alone, evoke it.
EVOKE was developed in 2009 by the World Bank. Yes, the World Bank, in association with or along with Jane McGonigal, a game legend. The goal of the game was to empower children around the world, young people around the world, but especially in Africa, to be able to find creative, community-based solutions to their most urgent social needs. What would happen is, once every week for 10 weeks, the game would send out something called an urgent evoke to players, identifying an urgent social need. And then these young people would use collaboration, innovation, imagination, social networking, and local resources to try to solve that problem in their community. What I found so interesting about this game is, keep in mind, this was going out to the poorest of the poor in some of the most impoverished areas in the world. And 60% of those who played said it changed their view of what they could do in the world and the impact they could have on their community. That is a game for good. Now, bringing games for good back to Washington, we need look no further than UW and its protein folding game called Fold It. So, in order to understand Fold It, you need to understand a little bit about proteins. Proteins are the workhorses of cells. They exist in every cell, in every living thing. And while they come in thousands of different varieties, every protein has a long amino acid chain with little side chains that come off of it. You'd think that long amino acid chain would want to stretch out, but it doesn't want to. In fact, it will always fold into the most compressed, stable, and efficient form it can find. Always. And identical proteins will always fold the exact same way. The last thing you need to know is proteins are really, really small. In fact, they're so small we can barely see them under an electron microscope. And what we can see is basically a 2D image. So what scientists do is they take little what I call fingerprints, like they find all the prints the protein leaves behind, and they can restructure the amino acid chain and the side chains. What they can't do is they can't figure out how to fold it into its natural form. So what have they started doing? Well, UW drops it into their game, Fold It. And they send it out to the game community, who then works within parameters, there are things you can and can't do, to fold it into its natural form. Why on earth would anyone want to do that? Well, because if we can figure out what a protein looks like in its natural form, we can then create protein blockers that fit perfectly into it and stop the protein from replicating or maturing. Why would we want to do that? Because proteins are in all living things, including viruses and diseases. Imagine this. You were just diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Your doctor comes in, tells you have about 2 years left to remember your kids' names. But then you go to a specialist in protein design, and they inform you that they have recently designed a protein that will target the Alzheimer's protein and stop its maturity, and you now are going to be able to talk to your kids and remember their name for the next 20 years. This isn't science fiction. This has actually recently happened, not in the Alzheimer's space, but with a different disease, HIV. So about 15, 20 years ago, scientists realized that there was a protein that was allowing the HIV virus to mature. And they could figure out exactly what it looked like from the fingerprints, but they couldn't figure out how to fold it. So they dropped it into Fold It, and Fold It sent it out to its game community around the world. And building upon one another, after not 15 years, 3 weeks. 3 weeks in the game community. An 18-year-old in London found the final step that the game community had built up, and one of the bigger advances in the fight against HIV occurred because of a game. Now that is a game for good. And there are many more to come. So I want to thank the CBA for having me here today. I want to thank all of you for putting up with me. And I especially want to thank Visual Media Group, a Bellevue-based company who put together this whole multimedia side of this. They are amazing. Kelly Sparks, CEO, thank you. Thank you, everybody.